Good morning, everybody. This is Nasira Jamal, your host on Thrive, Not Just Survive. Happy Friday to you all. I'm so grateful that you're here and that you are following these conversations that we're having. Of course, I'm interviewing during the week, I'm interviewing women entrepreneurs who are making impact, doing things for their community and their tribes. And that's an important thing to showcase. However, Fridays are dedicated to having this conversation with Dr. Cheryl Bryantbruce. And over the last few weeks, we have really dedicated this time to discuss uh, the stuff that's going on in America and globally, where we're talking about the racial injustice and Black Lives Matter. And I wanted to continue this conversation because there are so many different areas that this particular conversation where we don't seem to understand sort of the impact of how it's transforming and not just transforming actually, but just how it's impacting the different groups, the different areas of life for Americans, Black Americans that are really struggling to find a place where they can have equality in their just day-to-day life. So today the conversation is continuing with Dr. Cheryl because I feel it's an important one that we need to keep alive. So let me bring her on and get this conversation started. Hi, Cheryl. Thank you so much for sharing your time with us today.
Good morning, Nasir. Always glad to be here. Always glad to be here.
I know before the show started, we had a tiny little conversation about the things that have happened this past week. And, I want you to walk us through what that is and give us the insight and give us some idea of, where we talk about being part of the solution and coming together and understanding the impact this is having on Black American lives and how we can be part of that change.
Excellent. Excellent. Well, I think that the one thing that people really need to realize, because we've really been talking a lot about police violence and safety in America and worldwide, really. People need to realize, however, that this whole Black Lives Matters thing, it's more than just our physical safety. It is our overall well-being because African Americans are impacted every single day of their lives on multiple different levels. And this has really, for me, been a most interesting week and yesterday, a particularly interesting day because there were several events that transpired that impact me both directly and indirectly, and of which I am part of working on a solution. Some of them at a more global level, and some of them just what can I do in my own backyard, in my own environment? And I had an event that happened yesterday, and it was a little bit of a mixed event because it wasn't just I was advocating on two different levels. I was advocating for myself as a Black woman, but I was also advocating for people with disabilities because I have an assist dog, I have a medical condition, and I have a service dog. And I went into a grocery store, an Albertsons grocery store, and I've gone into this particular store several times. I've gone into a number of different stores in this particular town, and for the most part, it's been okay. I am aware that there is a higher level of racism in this town, but for the most part, it's been okay. However, each time I've gone into this particular store, I have been uncomfortable. I have been aware of the people staring at me. And you shouldn't have to go into a grocery store and feel out of place or uncomfortable. I just want to buy groceries and eat like everybody else. But I also take the dog. And in this case, the dog was clearly marked with her service dog vesting. I have an ID and a badge for the dog. And I've had interactions in the past um, on it, and they've been kind of lower level interactions. And yesterday, as I was entering the store, and I was accompanied by a friend who happened to be a white woman who happens to be a disability advocate as well. And as we were going into the store, an older white woman came out, and she looked at me angrily. She hadn't even looked at the dog yet. It was me that she initially first focused on. And the look on her face was telling me that I wasn't welcome. And then she looked at the dog, and the dog gave her an excuse to interact. And so she said, "Well, we can't have dogs in the store." And I said, "Well, she's an assist dog." I showed her the vest, and I have her ID and badge. And she looked at me, and if looks could kill, I'd have been dead. She looked at me and she stomped off and threw her head and said, "Yeah, sure she is."
Hmm.
And so my friend had already started to walk off. And I started to walk off after her. And then I stopped and I thought about it. And I was like, I can't let this one go. On two prior occasions, I let it go. The first one wasn't a let it go because the first one, the young lady was appropriate in her interaction. We don't have dogs in the store. I said she's a service dog, showed her the ID. She was like, okay, enjoy your shopping. The second one was a negative interaction, but not quite the same thing. I was like, I need to educate these people. That's where I make the change. This is what I do. I, as an advocate, educate people. So I did go to the service people and I said, look, here's what happened. Here's the problem. The lady was wonderful. She said, I'm customer service and I can take a note and it will go into this person's file, but I cannot express this the way you can. So I need you to speak directly to the manager. I had the same conversation with the manager who encouraged me to call back today and speak with the the higher manager, which I am going to do. And they were like, well, we'll put a letter in her personnel file. That's not acceptable, so on and so forth. And I was like, that's wonderful. I appreciate that. That's a first effort, but that's not enough because she's not the only one. So what I want, I said, I'm a disability advocate. I'm a disability educator. I have a friend here who's a behavioral analyst who can talk about these things. I want you to call a meeting, to call a group together, and let us give your people a diversity sensitivity training to educate you on the disability issue, to educate you on the fact that every time I walk in this store with or without the dog, I feel uncomfortable. And it was interesting because when I went to the first woman, now there are almost no blacks in the town where I'm at. And when I went to the first woman to discuss it with her, I said, my name is Dr. Bryant Bruce. I have service dog. She says, oh, I know. We see you often. Well, I don't come often. I think I've been in the store 4 times, but they see me as soon as I walk in the door, with or without the dog. They see me because I stand out. And a good majority of the people in the store, um, I won't even say that. I won't even say that. I'll be truthful. Some of the people in the store are accommodating and friendly. The majority of the people are not. The majority of the people look at me like I don't belong there. And it's not in my head because, as I said, my friend was with me who was white. And she said, well, this is horrible. Like 2 people were nice,
Right.
and that's the experience. So on a daily basis, these kind of affronts every single day of your life, and most of the time you're turning the other cheek, but it's boiling inside of you. Before the show, we spoke of the trauma that you're having, feeling it's too much, and we have felt like that every day of our lives, and it's just come to a head. It's boiling over. Another prime example, and this has been going on actually for a couple of weeks, the one of, well, a priest, I'm a Black Catholic, a priest in our diocese And the bishop of our diocese hit national news. And the reason that they hit national news, and I'll name names too, because it is a big thing, and it's an event going on today, even which I'll be participating in. Father Aidan, oh gosh, I'm going to mess his name up. McClellan. It's an Irish name, and it's got kind of a funny spelling, and we all just call him Father Aidan. Father Aidan's been in the news. Bishop Michael Barber has been in the news, and the reason that Bishop Barber is in the news and that Father Aidan are in the news is because Father Aidan is the head of an ethnocentric, Black cultural church called St. Columba. And it's been a big mess because with the Black Lives Matter, St. Columba has been very progressive and is very proactive in terms of dealing with issues like this. And so Father Aidan went to Bishop Barber and basically put a call to action that, we have to do something about this. And Bishop Barber's response was that Black people, and we live in the city of Oakland as my primary location. Black people in the city of Oakland and basically in America should be happy not only with the way they're treated as Black Catholics, which is problematic, and they should be happy with the way that they're being treated in America. Father Aidan ended the conversation there. And part of the reason that Father Aidan ended the conversation there is because it was just complete evidence of where Bishop Barber was, because we have had dramatic interactions with him in the past. And I personally have called it out in the past. And Black people were doing what we tend to do. We tend to kind of back off and say, okay, we're not really going to rock the boat too hard. And I made a call back in 2016 saying we can no longer take that stand. We have to call these things out when we see them. And we have to make an attempt to affect positive change, or they will continue to happen. Fast forward 2020, we're in the same place, but worse. So now, Father Aidan took it to Facebook, and then it ended up in the media. And so on today, there is going to be a big town hall at St. Columba where this is being addressed. That is the way to handle these things, to talk about them, to bring the awareness of them, and then to have the conversations to figure out the positive actions to affect change. In my opinion, one of the things that needs to happen here, because this is not a first event and it is a big problem, the Pope needs to get involved. The Pope needs to get involved. The Pope needs to remove Bishop Barber from the Diocese of Oakland. Oakland is an incredibly diverse city. And if that is Bishop Barber's response, if that is his attitude, which it is because we've experienced it in the past, he needs to be removed and replaced with somebody who is willing to work with the diversity in a positive way. Call to action. We need to make calls to action with a plan. In the Catholic,
and I think that's really important, right? Like you have people in places of authority or some higher levels of, where if that's their core belief, if that is who they are as a person, and I think we touched on this last week, that you have to check on what they believe in, not just what they say, but really, like, who are they? What is their core belief? Because if it is different, their core beliefs and what they're saying, or if they're the same, then is that who you want making those decisions, right? For people, community, or whatever's going on. So I think that's a really important part that you say is the higher ups, like the Pope, needs to get involved, and there needs to be some sort of accountability for who's saying what and how they're affecting change or not affecting change or making the problem worse.
Exactly. And I mean, we're talking about one individual there, but this has been problematic throughout the Catholic Church, and throughout many other churches. Churches are where we're supposed to be living godlike existences, and yet there are many churches that I can walk in the door, and just walking in the door, depending on where the church is, I may be ushered out. You
Right.
know, I may not be welcomed in the first place, but if I'm allowed to enter, everybody in the church has turned around to look at me and made me feel uncomfortable. This plays on the psyche of Black people. It plays on the psyche of those of us who come to utilize services. It plays on the people who are trying to be a part of administering those services, because right now, in the last year, one of them, just like within the last couple of days, because that was one of my conversations for last night, 7 African American priests have died this year. 7 African American priests. And people might say, well, 7 priests, well, a whole lot more white priests died than that this year. The difference is, one, we're an extremely tiny group. There's just like a handful of Black priests to start off with. But what makes it unique is that most of these were young men, 60 to 70 years old. That's a young age to die. Young people who were vital in their community, and the common thread for them was that they were fighting issues of racism, and they were exceedingly stressed. One of those was our personal friend and the pastor of our church. And one of the things that we would do was we would have priest night to allow them to come to our house, and they could talk about anything and everything and just really let their hair down. And invariably, they would come together and they would talk about these issues of racism that they were dealing with. And so we knew that our priest was under tremendous, tremendous stress. And it eventually ended up causing him to have a massive heart attack. Almost all of these priests have died of massive heart attacks.
So
The
stress.
stress is killing them.
I want to talk about that because I knew we addressed it prior to the show. So as a young child, a young child that's African American, and they're beginning to see this as they're going into schools and friends, and things are going on around them. So as a child, it's there, perhaps subliminally there's messages, and then they get into their higher sort of teenage years, and then the adult life into workplace, and it compounds. We talk about this psyche, right, where it's being affected on a compounding way, that you're just layering it with more and more and more stressors. And the fact that you have to live in fear from a young age all the way to now as an adult, that fear is going to affect you in many ways, including your physical, like your life in terms of your health, right?
Yes.
You know
Yes.
that fear can transform into different illnesses and different, like you're saying, they died of a heart attack from levels of stress that they were dealing with. And the idea that, we need to treasure and cherish every human life, right? That we can't be so blinded by, well, that, anybody could die of a heart attack. But what are the underlying stressors? What are we dealing with?
Yeah.
And what were they dealing with? So I'm really glad you brought that up, because that compounding effect is greater, not just in what you're feeling and your psyche, but in your physical health.
Yes, because stress directly impacts your immune system. It reduces your immunity. And so it lays you open for various different affronts on your body. Now, I wanted to address, you were saying that that Black children, even as young children, maybe minimally impacted. Black children as young children are not minimally impacted. They are impacted in major ways. The first time I knew that I was a quote nigger, I was 5 years old.
Oh.
5 years old. The first time that I knew that I was significantly different, at the age of 3.5, almost 4, I had a small black baby doll. Black baby dolls at that time were little plastic rubber doll that was about this size, had a little bald head with painted hair. White baby dolls had lovely corn silk hair, beautiful dresses. Our babies came naked. They might have a diaper if we were lucky. And all of the little girls in my neighborhood were white. And we were all out playing on the lawn one day, and the trash truck was running by. And they were looking at my baby doll as they were brushing their corn silk doll's hair. And they were looking at my baby doll as I'm scraping across the plastic head with a plastic brush because it had no hair. And their response was, "Your baby is ugly." And all of the parents were standing talking. And I went to my mommy, and she was busy engaged in conversation. And I said, "Mommy, can I throw this baby doll away? I don't like her anymore." My mom's like, "Yeah, whatever." So I go over to the truck and I heft my baby doll into the truck. And as she was going, I had the most awful feeling inside of me because I was like, you are throwing away yourself. You are throwing away your blackness. You are throwing away the essence of who you are because you feel shame. And on that day, I made it a point to never feel that way again, to never throw myself away again, to never not accept myself, no matter what society said. I
And that
learned
was
that
at the
lesson at
like
4 years old. Unfortunately, a lot of Blacks don't ever learn that lesson at all because they're constantly getting bombarded with societal input telling them they are worthless. And so they are constantly throwing themselves away. So we have to empower Blacks. Blacks have to empower themselves. These conversations that we're having are important, but I encourage Blacks to do more than have the conversations. They need to look at the systems and see what needs to be changed and how can we affect that change. One of the areas that needs to be changed is the area of health disparity. Blacks die at a higher rate. They have higher rates of disease. And the reason for that is the stress. Racism causes stress. Racism is hazardous to our health. And so we have to look at that and see what are the ways that we can mitigate the damage that is being done. How can we boost the immune system? How can we minimize these health disparities? And, part of that is putting energy into our own systems, putting energy into our own communities, not depending on systems outside of. I'm working with a group right now that is looking at 4 communities in the San Francisco area. And one of the goals of that group is to empower the people within the community to positively affect their own health care, to educate them on lifestyle management so they can begin making the changes that are going to boost their own immune systems, because we are in a battle for our lives, and conversations are being had like this, and they're great, and changes are going to be made. You gave an example of the mayor of New York challenging the police department that they have to make changes from the bottom up in the police department in New York, and they gave them 9 months. 9 months is a long time for all kinds of stuff to happen, for all kinds of people to die on the streets. But as you pointed out, it is positive change, and in 9 months, something will be different because a plan has been put into effect.
Well, I
And
think it's important to have people accountable. Those people that
yes,
have the idea or the powers to make change, they need to be held accountable. And
yes,
I think as much as yes, it's 9 months. In New York, the mayor did say that, or I think the governor, that he's
hmm
9 months. The thing is, had he not done that, and we just go back to how things are, is also not acceptable. It is not
yeah,
acceptable, and I think it's about mayors, governors, the people that have the power to put in place a way to keep people accountable. And if that means funding gets removed from whatever services are being offered, then that's putting fire under the feet of those that can
hmm
get changed. So I do agree, nine
absolutely,
months is a long time. We can't lose more lives because of this kind of um, just unrest. This that we have no sort of measuring stick for a life. There shouldn't be this difference of a black life and another life. All lives are so important in terms of human race, but the black community is at risk right now, and
yes.
so we need to do something where we can bring that up to a level where we're not losing lives, like needlessly losing lives, right? So I
hmm
think that all the governors, all the people that do have the ability to make change and have that ability of authority, and I think that whatever time it takes, yes, 9 months is a long time, but let's at least start. Let's continue
Yes.
our conversations, continue to put pressure on those who can make those changes. And like you said, you're going in and saying, let's have a diversity conversation in grocery stores. Maybe this is where people can get involved and start at least having this as an opportunity to learn, right? For some of these
Yes.
people that perhaps are just blinded by whatever beliefs they've grown up with. So I think that we can all be part of the change. I think we can't put a blind eye to this, like turn around and say, well, it's not me, or I don't think like that. I think that we all have to take that first step.
Yeah, and I mean, we do all have to take responsibility. I was having a conversation with my friend yesterday, and initially she was a bit defensive in the conversation, and she was giving examples of where she had had things happen, but it always came down to every day of my life, every day of my life. And she had to acknowledge that. And, although she isn't an overt racist, she eventually had to acknowledge that she also was a part of systemic racism as she was using an example to make an example. She stepped right in it. And she realized as soon as she had done it, she said, that probably wasn't appropriate. She says, I'm not even really sure what that means, but I know that it's bad. And so she asked me, please explain this to me so I do understand what that means. And when I explained it to her, then it really hit her the impact, the power of words. Sticks and stones may break my bones. No, there is power in words and there is power in action. And she had inadvertently accidentally stepped into something unintentionally because of being she had the luxury. She grew up in the military, so the racism wasn't readily apparent, but she has had the luxury of also not seeing it. Even in the military, I did not have that luxury. So she got that understanding, and we were able to have an excellent communication. We may not have agreed on everything always, but she was shifted. She was enlightened. And even if that one little glitch that she made, she won't do that again because she now understands, and she'll now be thinking about the power of these words. Well, I've heard this before. How does that impact
Right.
different people? And we have to continue to have those conversations. The other thing that I'd really encourage people is a lot of people, they're Facebooking and showing incidents and, oh, this happened to me, and this is how I popped off, about it. That's not acceptable behavior. I am saying do confront the behavior when it happens. Don't walk away. Don't turn the other cheek. It's that time is past, that we can't put that genie back into the bottle. But when you have the conversations, have the conversation with the intent of affecting positive change, not just with the intent of shaming somebody, with the intent of affecting positive change. And that doesn't mean that somebody doesn't need to be shamed. I mean, some people, it is overt, mean racism. Even those people can be educated. And even if they're not educated, if they need to be shamed, shame them publicly. Have the conversation loudly so it can be overheard. But you be the one who is calm, who is articulate, who is educating as to why the behavior is inappropriate. You may be in a group of people who are overtly racist and not really willing to accept that, even if it strikes a chord in one person. It's a great thing. Even if it doesn't strike a chord in any of them, they've heard it. As they continue to get the messages, they will shift. Every change affects a change, either positive or negative.
So this
Be
is where
aware of
this
the
is where I
positive
think I want
change.
to, yeah, like I think you pointed out something really important is go with the intention of positive change. See, sometimes you go in with an intention of just being, you want to just fight it out, right?
Mm-hmm,
Then that is what transpires, right? And the message gets
mm-hmm.
lost in all of that aggression.
Yes,
But
yes.
we can go in with the intention of change, positive change, with the intention of educating, with the intention of, that love from your heart. Yes, you may be very, very disturbed or angered by it or, hurt by it. But if your intention is clear, that energy will have a different transformation. And I teach energy. I talk about vibration, and I talk about how this can affect everybody. And those
Mm-hmm.
things that we do have control over our own, plus how we deliver that to others. So as we tie this conversation up, I know that I've got listeners here. I like to keep it so that it's 30 minutes of good conversation where people can really dive in and get the information. As I wrap this up, would you just sort of shed a little bit of light of moving forward? How can we, as a group of what we're doing, how can we sort of move forward from this point?
I think that one of the important things to do, whether there are African Americans in your community or not, because a lot of people say, I don't even have Blacks in my community. Well, that is fine, but you are interacting in a world where we exist. Get educated, you know, look at the news, look at your Facebook page, listen to the conversations. Don't just sit on the news channels that are dismissing us, because there are news channels that are dismissing us. Look at a variety of different news. Look at your local news, look at world news, look at opinions from the other side, hear the other conversation. Go places that are going to make you uncomfortable. My white friend went to a Black town to work, and she experienced reverse racism. And
Mm.
she went in and had the conversation. Look, this is what I'm doing. This is where I'm at. This isn't acceptable. I'm trying to help. I hear where you're coming from, hear where I'm coming from. Let's meet in the middle and affect positive change. That was the way to impact change. If you see things happening that you don't like, you don't have to go to another town. There
Right.
are plenty of websites, news sites. Go on, comment, express your opinion, say what you would like to see change. If you have a good idea or what you perceive to be a good idea as to things that can be put into effect to implement change, you know, say, hey, I've been thinking, is this something that could be of help? And I do encourage you, if you are not African American, do not come in and say, well, you should just do this. You know, you are not within the experience. So there are things that you don't understand, but you may be seeing something that can be very helpful to the experience. And the other thing that I want to say about that is I don't want you to just look at this as a Black experience, because this is not just our experience. This is a worldwide experience. And when you're done with us, with Black Lives Matter, when changes are rolling into effect, it cannot stop there. There are the Native Americans, there are the immigrants, the Latinos. I mean, there are people with disabilities. There are people that are being affronted and minimalized and marginalized every single day. Right now, we're a big group that is hemorrhaging. So we need immediate attention. But there are other groups that are bleeding right now too, and they're going to need help as well. So start to pay attention to the world around you and actually ask yourself, not, is there anything that I can do to make a change? Because that's a cop out. People are like, well, I can't do anything to change it. I'm not a part of that. There are no Black people in my world, or I don't do that. You know, again, that goes into complicit, because if you're not a part of the solution, you're part of the problem. Look at it and see, what can I do to make a change? Can I reach out to someone else who's having the experience and even ask what I can do? That's an action. It's a positive action. Can I look at a feed on something? There's a news feed, an event. I mean, there's news feeds on Bishop Barber and what's happening in the Catholic Church. Go on, make a comment as to why, for you as a Catholic or even as a non-Catholic, why that is not acceptable in a religious institution. You know,
Yeah.
you can make an impact. Go to your politicians, make a call, send a message, call your police force and say, hey, I've been watching this Black Lives Matter thing. I don't want this happening in my community. I'm a taxpayer in my community, and you are accountable to me. And if you can't make my community safe without police brutality, then I am going to be moving to get your police department defunded. So you have the ability to affect change. Everybody does.
I think that's the thing, right? Is the ability we all have that. It's now getting up and taking action. And I think,
Yes.
That's what it's called for now. Now it's not just about saying the things that you talked about, right? As a backseat driver kind of thing. Well, it doesn't really affect me, or I can't make change. But I think that now the calling is everybody needs to get up and everybody needs to get together and make that change. So I want to thank you for your time today. This has been an amazing conversation and a much needed one. I feel like we continue. I know it's conversation, and I like to continue this with you, because as we get to learn from you, I think we can reach more people in terms of getting them to create action in their own communities, however small that might be. I think the idea is to awaken people to their own consciousness, to their own place of justice, of what that means for mankind. And I'm so grateful. I will continue this conversation with you next week. Thank you. Have a wonderful weekend. And again, I love you.
You as well, Nasira. It's always a pleasure to be with you.
Thank you. So I hope that this conversation lit something in you, in terms of where you stand, what your levels of understanding is. And if it isn't, perhaps it's time to get educated on it, start asking questions, and start being part of these conversations, and see how you can make the difference in your community, in your world. I also just wanted to highlight that, Dr. Cheryl did talk about, right now, the Black community is really in need of our support and actions. But there's racism going on in many different areas. When you look at children with disabilities or people with disabilities, you look at the Latinos, you look at all of these areas, everybody in those areas is affected with their self-worth. And we can really create a new world only when we can create a new understanding of what equality is and how we can be a part of it. So from that angle, I want to end this Friday's broadcast sending you guys a lot of love. And if there's anything that you need from me or Dr. Cheryl, please reach out to us. Remember to be kind to yourself and to others, and I'll see you on Monday. Bye, everybody.